The planet smelled like burnt transmission fluid and regret. Not metaphorically, the ground was literally soaked in some kind of petrochemical runoff that had been baking under a dim orange sun for what I estimated was about 400 years. I knew this because the welcome sign at the edge of the landing crater said Delvari Industrial Colony, established 2247, decommissioned 2289, and the current year, according to my cracked wrist nav, was 2691. My name is Caladran Maldonado, 46 years old, senior cargo dispatcher for Pembroke Freight Lines, which sounds impressive until you realize it means I babysit crates of freeze-dried protein paste across 12 systems while arguing with dock workers about weight tolerances. I have a bad knee from a loading accident on Ganymede Station, a divorce that cost me a perfectly good apartment on Callister 4, and exactly zero experience building spaceships, which is a problem because about 90 minutes ago, my cargo shuttle, the reliable Edna, a name that had always been aspirationally inaccurate, had suffered what the manual politely calls catastrophic drive containment failure, and what I would more accurately describe as the engine ate itself and fell out the bottom of the ship while I was trying to land. And I was standing in a field of industrial wreckage, watching black smoke curl from the Edna's shattered hull, doing the math. No functioning drive, no long-range comms. Those ran through the drive housing because some engineer at Pembroke had decided that consolidating critical systems into one module was elegant design. No beacon. The emergency transponder had been due for replacement 6 months ago. But the requisition kept getting bounced back with notes about budget alignment. So here I was, stranded on a planet that the Freight Guild nav charts listed as uninhabitable, no commercial value, a void. A planet so worthless that it didn't even have pirates. Well, I said to nobody, at least I can't get fired for being late. The crater where the Edna had dug her grave was about 300 meters wide, ringed by the skeletal remains of what had once been a refinery complex. Rusted towers, collapsed conveyor systems, pipes running everywhere like the circulatory system of some dead mechanical giant. Everything was coated in that same oily residue, and the air had a thickness to it that made breathing feel like drinking warm soup. I inventoried what I had. The Edna's cargo bay had partially survived, miracle number 1, which meant I had 14 crates of protein paste, a toolkit meant for minor hull repairs, 2 emergency water recyclers, a med kit, and a survival blanket that was about as useful on this swamp-temperature planet as a raincoat in a swimming pool. No drive components, nothing that could generate thrust, nothing that could break orbit. I sat on a crate of protein paste and considered my options with the careful deliberation of a man who had none. That's when I heard the voice. "You gonna sit there all day, or are you gonna come unhook me from this dock clamp before my joints seize up permanently?" It came from somewhere inside the refinery wreckage, scratchy, irritated, the vocal quality of a chain smoker who'd been gargling gravel for 40 years. I grabbed the biggest wrench from the toolkit, not because I thought a wrench would help against whatever was talking, but because holding something heavy makes you feel like you have a plan, and walked toward the sound. Behind the third collapsed building, half buried under a landslide of corroded sheet metal, I found it. It was a boat, an actual boat, hull about 8 meters long, flat-bottomed, with a wheelhouse that looked like someone had built a garden shed on a barge and then beaten it with hammers for a decade. The paint had been blue once, maybe, in the same way that I had been optimistic once. Now it was a color that could best be described as abandoned. A chunky outboard propulsion unit hung off the stern, caked in rust and old lubricant. "Down here, genius, the clamp. Port side. You blind or just committed to being useless?" I found the dock clamp, a massive industrial thing bolted to a concrete pylon that was itself crumbling. The boat's mooring ring was fused to it with corrosion. "You're a boat," I said. Autoboat. Designation TB-40, trawling and transport, Delvari colony fleet, but everyone called me Grasser. Grasser. It means Grease, on account of my refined personality. You gonna stand there repeating things I say, or are you gonna get me loose? I've been clamped to this dock for 402 years, give or take. My joints are not what they used to be. I examined the clamp. It was corroded solid, but the bolt heads were still visible. I fitted the wrench and started working. So you're an AI, I said. I'm an autonomous vessel with integrated personality architecture and a factory-installed sarcasm module that has been running unsupervised for 4 centuries. But sure, AI works, short and dismissive, just like my service record. How are you still running? The colony's been dead for 400 years. Something inside Grasser's hull made a sound like a cat being stepped on. Solar trickle charger on the wheelhouse roof. Keeps the core alive. Everything else is shot. My navigation suite thinks it's still 2289. My depth sounder is convinced we're underwater. And my propulsion system, another horrible sound, needs diesel. Diesel. Petrochemical combustion fuel, C12 to C20 hydrocarbons, the good stuff, the thick stuff, the stuff that makes an engine purr like a happy predator and turns exhaust into a personal statement. Nobody uses diesel anymore. That's been obsolete for... I know how long it's been obsolete, pal. I was obsolete before the colony shut down. I was obsolete when they launched me. I came off the assembly line already behind the times, and I have made peace with that in a way that you, standing here with no ship and no plan, clearly have not made peace with your own situation. The bolt gave. Then, the second one. Grasser's mooring ring dropped free with a clang that echoed across the dead refinery like a bell. "Oh," Grasser said. "Oh, that's something. Haven't felt that in a long time. Freedom, or at least the structural prerequisite for it." I looked at the boat, then I looked at the sky, then I looked at the boat again. "Grasser," I said slowly, "how high can you go?" "I'm a boat, Maldonado. I go on water, occasionally under it when things go badly. The concept of up is not in my operational vocabulary. What if we changed that?" The silence that followed was the longest 3 seconds of my life. "I'm listening," Grasser said, "and I want you to know that I'm only listening because I've been talking to myself for 4 centuries, and I'd listen to a rock at this point, but I'm listening." Here was my thinking, and I want to be clear that I recognized it as insane, even as I was having it. The Edna's cargo shuttle had no drive, but it had structural components, hull plating, wiring, the hydraulic systems that operated the cargo doors, the fuel cells that powered the life support. Those still worked because I was still breathing, and Delvari had been an industrial colony, a refinery planet, which meant somewhere in this graveyard of rust and failure there were materials, components, things that, if I was creative enough and desperate enough, could be repurposed. The question wasn't whether I could build something that flew. The question was whether I could build something that flew long enough to reach the shipping lane that ran between Delvari and the Koppen Belt. About 900 kilometers of vertical ascent, and then a lateral drift into a corridor where passing freighters would pick up a distress signal. "That's suicide," Grasser said when I explained it. "Probably. You'd need thrust. Actual thrust, not boat engine thrust. You'd need something that can push mass against gravity for sustained..." I know what thrust is. Do you? Because your ship's engine literally fell out of your ship, which suggests a casual relationship with propulsion at best. That was a maintenance issue. Maintenance is the relationship, Maldonado. Everything else is just the wedding photos. I couldn't argue with that. My ex-wife had said something similar, though with less grease and more lawyers. I spent the rest of that first day mapping the refinery complex. It was enormous. Delvari had been a serious operation before whatever economic shift had killed it. I found machine shops with lathes still bolted to the floor, warehouses full of pipe fittings and pressure vessels, a fuel depot with storage tanks the size of apartment buildings, most of them empty, but three of them, three beautiful, rusted, glorious tanks, still had something sloshing around inside. I cracked the valve on the first one, and a stream of dark, viscous liquid poured out onto the ground. From 300 meters away, Grasa made a sound I can only describe as religious ecstasy. Is that... Oh, Maldonado. Oh, you beautiful, stranded, incompetent man. Is that diesel? Smells like it. Bring it to me. Bring it to me right now. Bring me a bucket. Bring me a barrel. Bring me a swimming pool of it. I will drink until my injectors weep with joy. Your engine doesn't work, Grasa. My engine hasn't worked in 400 years because it hasn't had fuel in 400 years. You try running on nothing and see how functional you are. I ran on coffee for 6 years during my marriage. I see your point. Lechak, getting diesel from the tank to Grasa required building a sled from scrap metal and dragging a barrel across 300 meters of uneven terrain in heat that felt like the planet was trying to slow cook me. By the time I got the first barrel to Grasa's stern and rigged a feed line into the intake manifold, my arms felt like someone had replaced my muscles with wet rope. I opened the valve. Diesel flowed into Grasa's engine for the first time in 4 centuries. What followed was the mechanical equivalent of watching a dead man take his first breath. Things clanked, things wheezed. Something deep inside the hull turned over with a grinding protest that made my teeth hurt. Black smoke belched from the exhaust stack. Thick, greasy, absolutely disgusting. "Oh, yes," Grasa groaned. "Oh, that's the stuff. That's the good stuff. Feel that combustion. Feel those cylinders waking up. Oh, I missed this. I missed this so much." "You sound like you need a room." "I need a garage. A garage with mood lighting and a full drum of premium blend. But this is acceptable. This is very acceptable." The engine coughed, sputtered, caught, died, caught again, died again. On the 5th attempt, it turned over and held, a rough, uneven idle that sounded like a drummer with a grudge, but it held. "I'm alive," Grasa said with a quietness that surprised me. "Maldonado, I'm actually alive. You were always alive. You were just parked. Being parked for 400 years is death, smart guy. It's just death with consciousness, the worst kind. A doom." I sat on the ground next to the boat and ate protein paste straight from the packet while the orange sun dropped toward the horizon. Grasa's engine idled beside me, uneven and rough, but running. The exhaust was foul. The sound was terrible. It was the most comforting thing I'd heard since landing on this rock. "So," Grasa said, "about this suicide mission. I prefer ambitious departure. I've been thinking, which I'm good at, lots of practice. The problem isn't thrust. Well, it is thrust, but not only thrust. It's also structural integrity, atmospheric drag, navigation, life support beyond your planet's surface recyclers, and the fact that you are one man with a wrench trying to build a spacecraft out of colonial garbage. Thank you for that comprehensive list of reasons I should give up. I'm not saying give up. I'm saying you need help. And since I'm the only other conscious entity on this planet, that means me. You're a boat. I'm a boat with 400 years of thinking time and a factory-installed engineering database that I have read cover to cover 63 times out of sheer boredom. I know the tensile strength of every alloy produced in this refinery. I know the pressure tolerances of every pipe fitting in that warehouse. And I know that if you strip my hull plating and reconfigure it with the right supports, you can build a thermal shield that will survive re-entry temperatures in reverse, which is to say, exit temperatures going up. I stopped chewing. You'd give up your hull? I'd give up my hull to get off this rock. I'd give up my hull, my wheelhouse, and my dignity. And I lost the dignity sometime around year 200 when a family of something that was either large rodents or small bears moved into my engine compartment and used my crankcase as a latrine. Grasa, if I strip your hull, you stop being a boat. Maldonado, if you don't build a ship, you stop being alive. Priorities.
Divide.
That night, I couldn't sleep.
2 units.
I lay on the survival blanket inside the least collapsed building I could find, staring at the ceiling and running numbers. The fuel cells from the Edna could provide electrical power. Grasa's diesel engine could, theoretically, insanely, probably not, but maybe, generate enough mechanical energy to spin a compressor, which could pressurize gas from the refinery's residual chemical stores, which could create thrust if directed through a nozzle of the right geometry. It was the dumbest propulsion system ever conceived. A diesel-powered compressor feeding a jury-rigged gas thruster mounted on a frame built from boat parts and refinery scrap, carrying one middle-aged cargo dispatcher toward the shipping lanes. I started laughing. Alone on a dead planet, I laughed until my ribs hurt. "You having a breakdown over there?" Grasa called from outside. "I think I'm having a breakthrough." "Those sound the same from where I'm sitting." Day 2. I started stripping the Edna. Every panel I could unbolt, every wire I could salvage. The hydraulic rams from the cargo doors, those were gold. They could actuate control surfaces. The nav computer was dead, but the gyroscope module had survived. And a gyroscope is just a fancy way of knowing which direction is up, which is the one thing you really need to know when you're trying to go there. Grasa supervised from the dock, offering commentary with the enthusiasm of a retired foreman who missed having someone to yell at. "That cross-brace is load-bearing, Maldonado." "I know." "Do you? Because you're cutting it with the confidence of a man who doesn't know." "I've been cutting things apart my whole life. Jobs, relationships, my credit score. And how did those turn out? I'm alone on a dead planet talking to a boat. How do you think?" "Fair point. Cut away." By the end of day 2, I had a pile of materials that looked like the aftermath of a junkyard explosion, and a rough sketch drawn in the dirt that looked like a child's drawing of a rocket if that child had been raised by mechanics. Grasa studied the sketch for a long time. "It's ugly," the boat said. "It doesn't need to be pretty. It needs to go up." "Those aren't mutually exclusive, you know. I was a good-looking boat in my day. You were a flat-bottomed industrial trawler with a shed on top. I was a flat-bottomed industrial trawler with a shed on top that had character. There's a difference." Day 3 was when things got real. I started the frame. Grasa's hull plating formed the base, surprisingly good material, thick enough to handle thermal stress, but light enough to not murder the thrust-to-weight ratio entirely. The Edna's cargo struts became the skeleton. I welded them together using the Edna's emergency arc torch, which was designed for patching microfractures and was now being asked to build a spaceship, a task for which it had never applied and was clearly unqualified. "Your weld bead looks like a drunk caterpillar," Grasa observed. "It'll hold. It'll hold like a promise from a politician, technically, until it doesn't." But it did hold. I tested every joint, banged on them with the wrench, hung my own weight from them. They held. On day 4, I built the thruster. This was the part that was either going to work or kill me, with no real middle ground. I found a pressure vessel in the refinery warehouse. A thick-walled cylinder about a meter long, designed to hold compressed industrial gas. I modified Grasa's diesel engine to drive a scavenged compressor unit, which would pull ambient atmosphere, compress it, and feed it into the pressure vessel. From there, a nozzle, machined from a pipe reducer fitting that I reshaped with a file and a lot of swearing, would direct the compressed gas downward. It wasn't a rocket engine. It was an air compressor with ambitions. I also rigged a secondary reservoir, 3 smaller cylinders I found in the back of the warehouse, rated for high-pressure storage. The compressor would pre-fill these on the ground before launch, giving me a reserve of compressed gas for the upper atmosphere, where the intake air would be too thin to feed the compressor directly. It was an ugly solution to an ugly problem, and I loved it. "You know what this reminds me of?" Grasser said, watching me bolt the engine to the frame. "Please don't say the Hindenburg." I was going to say my first captain, Mrs. Delacroix. She used to say that the difference between a plan and a fantasy is the willingness to get your hands dirty enough to find out which one you've got. Smart woman. She drove me into a reef on her third voyage and blamed the navigation charts. Smart doesn't always mean competent, but she tried. She always tried, even when the trying was stupid. I stopped bolting and looked at the frame. It was, objectively, by any engineering standard in any civilization, a disaster. It looked like someone had weaponized a scrap heap. The hull plating was mismatched. The welds were uneven. Grasser's engine sat in the middle like a heart transplanted from a completely different species. Grasser. Yeah. Is this gonna work? A pause. The engine idled. Somewhere in the refinery, metal creaked in the wind. "I don't know," Grasser said. "But you're the first person to ask me to be part of something in 400 years, so I'm choosing to believe it will." Day 5. I almost quit. The compressor failed its first test. The pressure vessel leaked at the seam where I'd welded on the nozzle mount. The hydraulic actuator for the control fins jammed. I burned my hand on the arc torch, badly enough that the medkit's antiseptic made me see colors when I applied it. I sat in the dirt, hand wrapped in gauze, looking at the thing I'd built. It looked like a monument to stubbornness, a shrine to a man who didn't know when to stop. Maldonado. "What? You want to hear something that's going to annoy you? Is there any other kind of thing you say?"
But I'll try.
In the 400 years I've been parked here, I've watched this planet try to kill everything on it. The buildings, the machines, the roads, even the concrete. It's been breaking down year by year, turning back into dust. And you know what the only thing is that's still standing? Your ego. The things that were overbuilt. The joints that some welder took extra time on. The bolts that some mechanic tightened one more turn than the manual said. The stuff that somebody cared about beyond the minimum. That's what lasted. Everything else is rubble. I looked at my welded seam. "The leak. You're saying I should redo it. I'm saying you should redo it and care about it this time. Not just enough to pass. Enough to last." I redid the seam. It took 4 hours, working slower with my burned hand, adjusting my grip on the arc torch to keep the gauze clear of the heat. It didn't leak. I fixed the compressor mount. 3 hours, it held. I rebuilt the hydraulic actuator from scratch, using parts I scavenged from a forklift buried in warehouse debris. 5 hours, and by the end, my burned hand was throbbing so badly I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. But the actuator moved smooth and true. By the end of day 5, the thing in front of me looked slightly less like a death trap and slightly more like something that had been built with intention. Day 6, I ran the first full system test. Grasser's diesel engine roared to life, rough, loud, belching that gorgeous black smoke, and drove the compressor, which spun up with a whine that climbed in pitch until my fillings buzzed. The pressure vessel filled. The secondary reservoirs filled. I opened the nozzle valve a crack. A column of compressed air blasted downward with enough force to scatter loose debris for 20 meters and shove the entire frame sideways. "Thrust!" Grasser screamed over the noise. "That's thrust, Maldonado! That's actual thrust!" I shut it down. My hands were shaking, not from fear, not from the burn, from something I hadn't felt in a long time. "It's not enough to break orbit," I said, running the numbers. "Not even close. But it might be enough to get to altitude, maybe 40 kilometers, if the fuel holds, if nothing breaks. 40 kilometers puts you in the mesosphere, thin air, cold. But if you can reach 40, a distress beacon from there would reach the shipping lane, maybe. Maybe isn't great. Maybe is what we've got. And maybe built on 6 days of work and 400 years of waiting is better than maybe built on nothing. I spent the rest of day 6 mounting the Edna's fuel cells and life support recycler into the cockpit, which was Grass's old wheelhouse, stripped to the frame and reinforced, mounted on top of the thruster assembly. It was the ugliest cockpit in the history of spaceflight. The controls consisted of the hydraulic actuator lever, the nozzle valve, the engine throttle from Grass's original helm, and a handheld GPS unit that I'd salvaged from the Edna's emergency kit, which could tell me my altitude, but not much else. I also mounted the Edna's emergency transponder, the one that should have been replaced 6 months ago, on the highest point of the frame. If I could get high enough, maybe, that word again, the transponder would reach someone, anyone. "You should name it," Grassa said that evening. "Name what?" "The ship. You built a ship. Ships get names." "You really think it's a ship?" "I think it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And I once watched a family of seabirds try to nest in my exhaust stack. But it's a ship. You built it with your hands. You bled on it. My hull is part of it, so name it." I thought about it, about the Edna, which had been named by a Pembroke bureaucrat, about my old apartment on Callister 4, which I'd never bothered to make feel like home, about all the things in my life I'd done halfway, with one foot out the door, ready to quit the moment it got hard. "Committed," I said. "That's a terrible name for a ship. That's why it's perfect." Day 7, launch day. I woke up before the orange sun cleared the horizon. The sky was the color of a bruise healing, purple fading to yellow at the edges. The refinery complex stood around me like the bones of something ancient and forgotten. Grassa was quiet, engine idling low, thinking probably. We'd rigged a communication line between the boat's speaker system and the cockpit, a wire running from Grassa's core to a speaker I'd mounted next to the pilot seat. The boat wouldn't be going up, but the boat would be talking me through it. "You've got about 300 liters of diesel in the feed tank," Grassa said. "At full compression, that gives you maybe 12 minutes of thrust. 15 if you feather the throttle during the mid-altitude coast, plus whatever's in the reserve cylinders for the top end. 12 minutes to reach 40 kilometers. 12 minutes to reach as high as you can get. 40 is the target. You might get 30, you might get 50, you might get 12 and explode. The point is, you'll find out." "You're terrible at pep talks." "I'm a boat, Maldonado. Pep talks aren't in my programming. Honest operational assessments are." I climbed into the cockpit, strapped in with cargo harness webbing that I'd repurposed as seat restraints. Checked the systems. Fuel cells green, recycler green, transponder ready, hydraulic actuators responding. My burned hand ached inside the gauze as I gripped the throttle, but it closed around the lever and held. I looked out through the gap in the hull plating that served as a windshield. Delvari stretched out before me, ugly, dead, soaked in chemical waste, a planet that nobody wanted, a place where things got left behind. Grassa, yeah, thank you, for the hull, for the engineering database, for the 400 years of sarcasm. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're on a freighter drinking something that isn't recycled sweat. If I don't make it, then I go back to talking to myself, which I'm very good at. But I'd prefer not to, so don't screw this up. I hit the engine starter. Grassa's diesel roared. The sound was different now, channeled through the compressor, directed through the nozzle. It wasn't the ragged idle of a boat engine anymore. It was something new, something that wanted to go up. I opened the throttle. The frame shook, vibrated. The nozzle shrieked as compressed air blasted downward, debris scattered. The cockpit rattled around me like a tin can in a washing machine. I opened the throttle more. The ground fell away. "You're off the ground!" Grass's voice crackled through the speaker. 2 meters! 5! You're climbing, Maldonado! You're actually climbing! 10 meters. 20. The refinery complex shrank below me. I could see the whole dead colony now. The buildings, the roads, the empty lots where workers had lived. From up here, it didn't look abandoned. It looked like it was sleeping. 50 meters, altitude increasing. Watch your pitch. You're tilting 3 degrees starboard. I nudged the hydraulic lever. The control fins adjusted, the tilt corrected. 100 meters. The air was cooler. The vibration had settled into a rhythm, harsh but predictable. Grass's engine was doing something it had never been asked to do, and it was doing it with the stubbornness of something too old and too dumb to know it should fail. 500 meters! Maldonado, you beautiful idiot. You're at 500 meters. How's the fuel? I checked. 2/3. Engine temp is high but holding. Let it run hot. That engine ran hot for 15 years under Mrs. Delacroix and never once complained. Well, it complained constantly, but it never quit. 1 kilometer, 2. The sky darkened from orange to amber to something approaching indigo. I could see the curve of Delvari's horizon now, a long, slow arc of brown and grey. 5 kilometers. The air was thin enough that the thruster efficiency was changing. Less atmosphere to compress meant less thrust per cycle, but also less drag. The math was shifting underneath me like sand. 7 kilometers. You're above the weather layer. How are you feeling? Like I'm sitting on a bomb. Technically accurate. How's the fuel? Half. You need to feather, coast for a bit, let momentum carry you. I eased the throttle back. The roar dropped to a growl. The vibration softened. The cockpit got quiet enough that I could hear myself breathing. 15 kilometers. The sky was dark blue now, almost black at the edges. Stars beginning to appear, faint and tentative, like they were checking to see if it was safe. Maldonado. Yeah, I can barely read you. Signal's gonna break up soon. Too much distance. I know. So I'll say this now. In 400 years, nobody came back for me. Nobody. And I spent most of that time thinking that it was because I wasn't worth coming back for. Too old, too slow, wrong kind of engine, obsolete before I launched. A pause. Static crackled. But you used me. You used everything I am to build something that goes up. And that means I mattered, even if it was just for this. I mattered. I couldn't answer right away because something was in my throat that wasn't related to atmospheric pressure. You mattered, Grasser. You always mattered. Someone just had to show up. Yeah, well, you showed up 400 years late. Your punctuality is a disgrace. I'll work on it. You do that. Now stop talking to me and fly your stupid ship. 20 kilometers. The fuel gauge was dropping. The engine temperature was climbing. The frame was making sounds that I didn't like. Pops and groans from thermal stress as the temperature outside plunged while the engine ran hot. 25, 30. The thruster was losing efficiency fast now. The atmosphere was so thin that the compressor was starving for intake. I switched to the reserve cylinders, pre-compressed gas from the ground, bypassing the intake entirely. The thrust steadied, weaker than the full compressor output but consistent, enough to keep climbing. 33 kilometers, 35. I pushed the throttle to maximum. Grasser's engine screamed, driving the last of the reserve pressure through the nozzle. The frame shook so violently that my vision blurred. The welds, my welds, the ones I'd redone, the ones I'd cared about, held. I could feel them holding, could feel the difference between work done to pass and work done to last. 38, 39. The reserve cylinders emptied. The fuel gauge touched 0. The engine coughed, sputtered, caught, sputtered again. 40. The engine died. Silence, complete, absolute silence. No vibration, no roar. Nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat and the faint whisper of the last wisps of atmosphere against the hull. I was at 40 kilometers, give or take. The GPS unit said 41.3, but I didn't trust it beyond rough estimates. The sky above was black. The stars were out. Not tentative anymore, but blazing, furious, like they'd been waiting for me. Below, Delvari was a ball of brown and orange, ugly even from this height. A planet nobody wanted. But from here, it had a kind of dignity. Everything does, from far enough away. I activated the transponder. The little red light blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. I waited. The cockpit was getting cold. The life support recycler hummed, keeping the air breathable, but the fuel cells weren't designed for heating. I pulled the survival blanket around my shoulders. Finally useful. 5 minutes. 10. The Committed was at the apex of its arc. No thrust, no atmosphere to speak of, just a man in a shed made of boat parts sitting at the edge of space, broadcasting a signal that might or might not reach anyone. 15 minutes. I started to think about Grasa, alone on the surface, about whether the boat would go back to waiting, another 400 years maybe, talking to itself. 20 minutes. The transponder light changed from red to green. "Signal contact," said a voice I didn't recognize, crackling through the transponder's tiny speaker. "Unidentified vessel. This is MFV Katarina Sund, Koppen Belt Commercial Fleet. We are reading your emergency beacon at, are we reading this right? 41 kilometers altitude, planetary body Delvari." "This is Caladran Maldonado," I said, and my voice cracked, and I didn't care.
Do you copy?
"Senior cargo dispatcher, Pembroke Freight Lines. My ship crashed. I built this thing. I'm requesting immediate rescue and recovery."
Your coordinates.
A long pause. "Mr. Maldonado, our scans are showing your vessel has no functioning drive, no thermal shielding rated for re-entry, no navigation system, and what appears to be, is that a diesel combustion engine?" "It belongs to a friend." Another pause. I could hear muffled voices, the crew of the Katarina Sund trying to figure out what they were looking at. "Sir, how did you get to altitude in that?" "I committed," I said. The Katarina Sund picked me up 3 hours later. Their shuttle matched my orbit. I'd entered a decaying elliptical, because apparently 41 kilometers on Delvari was just barely enough for a short-term trajectory, and pulled me out of the cockpit through the windshield gap because the door had welded itself shut from thermal stress. The shuttle pilot, a woman named Gunther, with forearms like dock cables and a face that suggested she'd heard every possible excuse from every possible idiot in the space lanes, looked at the Committed for a long time as they pulled away. "That's the worst spaceship I've ever seen," she said. "It got me here. Barely. Barely counts." She gave me a look that was 50% pity and 50% something that might have been respect if you squinted hard enough. "Yeah," she said, "I guess it does." On the Katarina Sund, they gave me water that wasn't recycled, food that wasn't protein paste, and a bunk with actual sheets. I slept for 14 hours. When I woke up, the ship's comm officer told me that Pembroke Freight Lines had been notified of my survival and had expressed, in the officer's words, "moderate institutional relief." They also said to remind you that the cargo manifest for the protein paste needs to be filed within 30 days, regardless of circumstances, the officer added. Of course it does. I spent the next day recovering, eating, and staring out the observation port at the stars moving by. The Katarina Sund was a mining freighter. Big, slow, unglamorous, crewed by people who worked hard and smelled like engine coolant. My kind of people. On the second day, I asked the captain if there was any way to send a transmission back to Delvari's surface. Short range, tight beam, directed at the refinery complex coordinates. "To what?" the captain asked. "There's nothing down there." "There's a boat." The captain clearly had questions, but had learned over a long career of hauling ore through unpleasant systems that some questions weren't worth asking. The comm officer helped me set up the transmission. I sat in front of the mic for a minute, trying to figure out what to say to a 400-year-old autoboat that had given me its hull so I could fly. "Grasa," I said. "It's Maldonado. I made it. The transponder worked. I'm on a freighter called the Katarina Sund, and they're taking me to Koppen Station. I'm alive because of you, because you gave me your hull and your engine and your 400 years of engineering knowledge and your absolutely insufferable personality." I paused. "I'm going to come back for you. I don't know when, I don't know how, but I'm going to come back, and I'm going to rebuild you, and I'm going to take you off that rock. You've been parked long enough." I paused again. "And I'm going to fill your tank with the best diesel in 12 systems, the premium stuff, the thick stuff, the stuff that makes an engine purr." The comm officer was staring at me. "It's a boat thing," I said. 3 weeks later, I was back on Callister 4. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it, half-furnished, impersonal, the living space of a man who'd never committed to being there. I stood in the doorway and looked at it and thought about Grasa's hull, stripped and repurposed, bolted to a frame with welds that I'd done twice because once wasn't good enough. I called Pembroke, filed the protein paste manifest, got yelled at by my supervisor about the Edna. Then I asked for my accumulated leave, 7 years of it, because I'd never taken a vacation in my career. Because taking a vacation means admitting you have a life outside of work. And I'd never been brave enough for that. They gave me 6 months. I used the first month to find a shipyard on Koppen Station willing to take on what I described as a complex retrieval and restoration project. The yard foreman, a massive Crenshaw species mechanic named Budo, whose body was basically a horizontal cylinder covered in tool-scarred hide with 4 stumpy legs and a face like a bulldog that had been gently stepped on, listened to my description of Grasa and said, "You want me to rebuild a 400-year-old diesel boat?" "Yes." "A diesel boat?" "Yes." "And put it in space?" "No. Just rebuild the boat. I'll put it in space myself if I have to." Budo blinked all 3 of his eyes in sequence, which is how Crenshaw expressed skepticism. "Why?" "Because it waited 400 years for someone to come back, and I told it I would." Budo blinked again, but differently. The third eye stayed open longer. In Crenshaw culture, that means something close to recognition, like seeing a reflection of something you respect. "I'll do it," he said. "But the diesel engine stays. That's the soul of the thing. You rip that out, you might as well build a new boat. The diesel engine stays. Then we've got a deal." 2 months later, I took a chartered shuttle back to Delvari. In the cargo hold was a prefabricated dock clamp, 200 liters of premium diesel, and a full restoration kit. The planet looked exactly the same. Brown, oily, abandoned. The refinery complex stood where I'd left it, slowly losing its argument with entropy. Grasa was where I'd left her, engine silent, solar trickle charger still feeding the core, waiting. I walked up to the boat, set down the diesel barrel, and knocked twice on what was left of the hull. "Took you long enough," Grasa said. "What's it been? 3 months? 4? 12 weeks. Felt like 400 years. A pause. "That's a joke. I know the difference now. I brought diesel. I can smell it. And before you say anything about smells being mentioned only once, that smell deserves an exception. That's the good stuff. The best in 12 systems, like I promised." I hooked up the fuel line. Grasa's engine turned over on the second try. The black smoke was thinner this time, cleaner. The idle was rough but steady, a heartbeat. "So," Grasa said, "what's the plan?" "Deal some Budo. He's the restoration guy. Says he can rebuild your hull. New plating, same design. Keep the engine, keep the core. Add some upgrades. Maybe interatmospheric capability if you want." "Interatmospheric? You mean flying?" "Short flights mostly. When needed. Maldonado, are you asking me if I want to fly? I'm asking if you want the option. The engine revved, just slightly. A pulse of excitement that burned a little more diesel than necessary. I'm a boat, Grasser said. I was built to float. I was designed for water. That's what I am. You were also the heart of a spaceship that hit 41 kilometers. You're whatever you decide to be. That's the cheesiest thing anyone's ever said to me, and I once had a captain who named me Pudding for 6 months. Is that a yes? Grasser's engine settled into a new rhythm, not the rough idle, not the desperate roar of the launch, something in between, something that sounded for the first time like contentment. Yeah, the boat said. That's a yes, but I'm keeping the diesel engine. Wouldn't have it any other way. I sat on the barrel of premium diesel and watched the orange sun set over the dead refinery for the last time. Somewhere above us, the Katarina Sund was making another run through the Koppen Belt, hauling ore, doing the unglamorous work that keeps civilization bolted together. Somewhere on Koppen Station, Budo was sharpening tools and reading the restoration specs I'd sent him. And here, on a planet that nobody wanted, a man and a boat were making plans. I thought about what Grasser had said, about the things that lasted being the things that someone cared about beyond the minimum. I thought about the committed, ugly and impossible, held together by welds I'd done twice. I thought about my apartment on Callister 4 and how when I got back, I was going to unpack the boxes that had been sitting in the closet for 3 years. Hang something on the walls. Buy a plant maybe. Commit to being there. Failure is just information delivered the hard way. The real waste is never putting everything on the table, never finding out what you've actually got, playing it safe enough that you never discover whether you're the kind of person who can build a spaceship out of garbage or the kind who sits on a dead planet waiting for someone else to solve the problem. I'd been the second kind for 46 years. Turns out, I was the first kind all along. I just hadn't been tested. Maldonado, Grasser said, yeah, stop having a moment and pour me another liter. The good stuff. I poured. The engine purred. The stars came out, and they were not tentative. They were blazing.
Dirt smells like oil and 1,000 lost years, but it's breathing far deeper than my old career. I crashed in the wreckage of other men's dreams to find out my own were just pulling at seams. They call this a wasteland, a rock left to die, but I'm looking right up a heavy black sky, thinking maybe the tragedy isn't the crash. It's the decades I spent just protecting my trash. We pray for the rescue, we beg for the line, but comfort's a killer that takes its sweet time. You think you're surviving the safe little plan, you're just rusting away in the palm of their hand. It takes a disaster to break the machine, to strip down the metal and see what it means. You're not stranded, my friend. You're finally free from the ghost of the person you promised to be. I'm ripping the hull off a cynical ghost, trading the ocean for heaven's dark coast. The welds might be ugly, the engine might scream, but it's running on purpose, not corporate steam. We build our own cages and call them a home. Terrified we might be left all alone, but solitude isn't a grave or a curse. It's the mirror that shows you the end of the worst. We pray for the rescue, we beg for the line. The comfort's a killer that takes its sweet time. You think you're surviving the safe little plan, you're just rusting away in the palm of their hand. It takes a disaster to break the machine, to strip down the metal and see what it means. You're not stranded, my friend, you're finally free from the ghost of the person you promised to be. Light up the fuel, let the atmosphere burn. There is no back home where I want to return. The heaviest gravity isn't the ground, it's the fear of the silence before you resound. You didn't crash here to die in the dust. You crashed here to learn how to fly from the